we are discussing a new topic, basically the cross country experience in public private partnership in three different fields, three different areas: airports, ports and roads. And after this discussion, we will also have a separate discussion on public private partnership in railways and urban transportation services. So, let me begin with basically what is basically the public private partnership, and then we will try to have the different discussion how public private partnership is working in airports, ports and roads. To recap the public private partnership, it is nothing except the contractual agreement, as we have discussed in detail while discussing the public private partnership. And since this is the contractual agreement between public and private sector, so both are responsible according to the contractual agreement. Public private partnership are in practice since the early 90s. By early 2000s, we saw a significant increase in the use of public private partnership, especially in the infrastructure sector. And this type of models which were discussed in our previous lecture, we have seen that such models are implemented in various OECD countries, including Australia, France, Germany, Korea and the UK. Some of the examples: for example, in Britain 1992, private finance initiatives which was focused on reducing the public sector borrowing requirements, that was one of the major initiatives in 1992. Like that, in Canada in 1993, Canadian Council for Public Private Partnership were also established, and with this historical overview, we can have the separate discussion on different sectors, participation of public private partnership in different sectors. For example, the PPP in airports, airports are, as we have seen, that one of the most efficient means to provide connectivity to the national, regional and international economies. And it is not only useful for the travel movement or the movement of the public from one place to other place, but it is equally playing important role in moving the final products and the raw materials and the technical products from one place to other place. So, the investment in airport infrastructure is thus necessary for economic growth and development in both greenfield as well as the brownfield projects. So, airports were traditionally believed to be the government obligation, as we have also realized in our previous discussion that various airports were established with the support of the government 100 years before, but at the same time we do have seen that all those activities which were the government activity is now being transferred to the private sector. In some country it is solely transferred to the private sector if it is a greenfield projects, and if there are certain infrastructures continuing from past, then government is also having a different type of models which we have also seen in case of certain FDI investment in many countries. So, airports are initially it was owned, managed and operated by the national governments, and this trend however changed and private sector were involved today with sharing of the responsibility with the government. So, different methods of models of public private partnership is practiced in the airport: design, construction and development and ownership. If one can have the cross country examination, one can see here the public private partnership in airports in Costa Rica, where we are finding that the design, construction, operation and maintenance of the new passenger terminal of Daniel Orduber Curious Airport was done by the public private partnership model. So, the agreement between the government and the Coriport SA and the Coriport consortium were made. Concession period was established for 20 years, that included construction, operating, risk coverage by these by the private firm, and guaranteed minimum income facility is provided, where the government will guarantee minimum income for first 15 years. So, this may be the example where the real public private partnership has started working, because government has provided certain assistance in terms of giving the guarantee to the developer, to the contractor, that for 15 years there will not be any minimum loss in terms of generating the income for the private party. But at the same time, the firm is allowed to operate all types of activities, construction and maintaining and operating activities by their own means. In case of South Africa, for the management and operation of Sukuja Airport in Kruger National Park 2008, single runway was there, airport was very small airport. So, private party has to bear the liability and insurance obligation in this particular case, where the 10 years concession is provided from the starting of the operations. Now, in terms of ports development, public private partnership are practiced in port management, development and operation. Traditionally, government functions as the port operator and regulator were seen. So, there are certain models of public private partnership which may be discussed here. One of the model is the landlord port model, which has been developed to allow the private entities for the port operations. Government holds the entitlement of land and other assets of the port. So, in this model, government is basically taking care of the planning part, regulation part and the ownership part of that particular port, but at the same time private sector is really responsible for the construction, operation and the ownership of superstructure of that particular port. So, this is one of the model which was basically used as a part of public private partnership in the ports development. Public private partnership in ports in Honduras, where the construction, development and financing of Puerto Cortes container and cargo terminal through management trust agreement between the company and the National Port Company and the Ficosa Bank were established. This particular example, through management trust agreement between the company and the government, which shows that the public private partnership is one of the agreement where the management trust agreement can be also adopted to find out that what basically what responsibility basically the public private is having and what responsibility the government is having, as in case of landlord port agreement. We have seen the responsibility shared between the government and private party. In case of ports development in Costa Rica, we are finding that contract agreement for designing, planning, financing, construction and maintenance of the Moine container terminal was developed, which was situated in the seaport complex of the Limon and Moine. Agreement between the government of Costa Rica and APM terminals and the APM terminals Central America were also done, which was administered by the Federal Concession Act of the Public Works with Public Services. So, in this case the 33 years concession period with 3 years of construction included was awarded to the private firms, but at the same time the private sector has to completely take over the entire risk in the project. So, now we are seeing a different sector, that is the road sector. Public private partnership in roads in Canada is one of the example here to discuss, and we are finding that in Canada Golden Ears Bridge crossing and British Columbia based on DVFO model was adopted. In this model 16 years of concession period were allotted. The private entity is paid capital payments and payments for the operation. Private entity pays for to the public authority a license fee for US dollar, a huge US dollar for the use of land facility, and private party is not authorized to charge user fee. So, in this case, as we have discussed in our discussion on public private partnership methods, where we were also discussing that there are certain areas where the government can decide whether the private party is allowed to charge any fee or not, and it all depends on what type of government policy is for the public, in which sector government really wants to support the public and in which sector government really wants to charge the public. So, in road sector, if we compare this particular example or this type of public private partnership with some other country, we are also finding that in road sector itself there are certain models where the public parties are allowed to charge the fees for a certain period of time, and a certain amount of after charging that, after a certain period of time, the private authority is allowed to transfer the infrastructure to the government, and that is really happening in the build, operate, transfer condition. But here we are finding that there is not any private party involved in this case which can charge the fee, but at the same time private entity pays to the public authority a license fee, which is again one of the for using the land facility, because the landowner is not the private party. So, the ownership of land is in the hand of government. So, this is again one of the landlord public private partnership model, where the ownership is in the hand of government, but at the same time private parties are constructing, maintaining and operating one of the infrastructure, road infrastructure for some time, and in return they really pay to the public, they really pay to the government a certain amount of payment. So, sea to sky highways in British Columbia again is on DBFO model, where the agreement for designing, building and financing for renovation were done. The concession period was again 16 years. Private party is not entitled to charge user fee for the facility. The private party is paid total performance payments. So, again in model in the second example, we are finding that this road development, road construction in Canada is basically the example where the private parties are not really free to charge whatever fee they are charging in whatever fee they want to charge, but ultimately government has finally decided that there should not be any charge, any fee charged from the public. So, in case of public private partnership model, especially in roads in Honduras, 4-lane highway alone, the Atlantic side of Honduras was 122 kilometers. The contract for construction, operation, transfer and maintenance were again given given to the private party, that involves design, finance, build, operate and transfer. This model may be also named as the BOT model, because ultimately the project has to be transferred to the government. So, based on minimum duration of 30 years, this particular project is again different from the projects in Canada, because in Canada the government has to really see the performance performance of the firm without any transfer, but in case of Honduras the government has to get the infrastructure ready from the private sector after 30 years. So, the public private partnership in railways, it provides immense opportunities today, and as a developing country, here we have taken the examples from Brazil, where we are finding that contractual agreements for developing 1674 kilometers of railway track for freight transport links to major ports of the country is being done by this public private partnership model, based on the development and operation model, agreements between the government and the consortium of several mining companies, and with 30 years period of concessions, private parties are entitled to collect user fees to recover long term variable cost and other cost. So, this is completely different from the Canadian road construction example, where the contractor was not supposed to charge any fee from the public. Here in Brazil, the government allowed them to charge, private party is being allowed to charge the fee from the public. In case of European Union, we can find out that channel tunnel fixed link across the English Channel between the United Kingdom and France is one of the public private partnership project. Contractual concession agreement between the United Kingdom and France and the Channel Tunnel Group Limited and France Manche SA being implemented, and based on the development, financing, construction and operation, this model is being implemented in railways. In UK, high speed railway link from St Pancras station, London to Channel 1 tunnel, agreement between the Secretary of the State of Transport UK and High Speed 1 Limited has been also experienced, and then that includes the design, construction, finance, operation and maintenance, not the transfer. In Peru, southern and the southern railway lines contract between the government and the private party is being achieved, and 30 years of concession with which can be also extended. The private party will are supposed to upgrade, rehabilitate the railway infrastructure, which includes the signaling and telecom system and the advancement of the operation. The access is open to other railway operators on payment basis. So, this is a little different from the other examples where the concession period is again subject to the extension. Public private partnership in urban, basically in case of this example, we are finding that due to the urbanization, rapid urbanization, which leads to the public transport, urban public transport, when we have to provide, it is not really an easy job for any government to provide such rapid urbanization requirement, especially for the traffic. So, there is a need to shift from private to public transport system, which was realized by many countries, and monorail, tram, metro and bus rapid transit system provides alternatives. Public private partnership in urban transport projects are important to facilitate a smooth and congestion free transportation. Delhi metro is one of the best example today, where we can see that how the urban public transport such as Delhi metro has provided a very peaceful way of travel compared to the diesel run bus in Delhi. So, in case of Australia, the urban public transport facility in Australia, state government Melbourne started the tender process of urban train and tram transport networks in 2007. In 9, the agreement between the Melbourne Public Transport Authority and the PTB was achieved, and for maximum of 15 years period, franchisee is for the initial period of 8 years and renewal for a further maximum of 3 years. Franchisee to operate railway passenger services on rail infrastructure and using and rolling stock leased to it by the end of the franchisee have agreed to the payment of franchisee payments and other payments on the terms of the agreement. So, here in this case, the tenure for providing infrastructure facility is not for 30 years, but for 15 years, but at the same time the payment and other payments on the terms of the agreement is also very much clear between the government and the private party, and this is another way to see that franchisee is initially for the period of 8 years, but again it is the subject of renewal for further 3 years. the Australian government has not really given a complete freedom to this particular firm to continue with the infrastructure facility without any proper control by the government. So, government year after a certain year, government is really having a control on the facility and the infrastructure provided by the private firm. So, this is one way to find out a very controlled mechanism of public private partnership. Again, in case of United States, an example can be the fast track Eagle projects agreement, the contract between the regional transportation district and the Denver transit partners being made, and the plan to build 122 miles of the new commuter rail and light rail, 18 miles of bus rapid transit and 21,000 new parking spaces at light rail and bus station. This is one of the bigger project. So, coming back to again Canada in terms of urban public transportation, the construction and operation of a rapid transport link from the Richmond city centers to Vancouver airport in Ottawa, and partners are the government of Canada, the province of British Columbia and other private companies. In transit, BC will design, build, partially finance, maintain and operate the Canada line. Construction and operation risks are to be borne by the private company Transit BC. So, in Canadian example, we are finding that complete risk is basically on the shoulder of the private party. In South Africa, the integrated rapid transit vehicle operator contract, the agreement between the city of Cape Town and a vehicle operator company is again established with the objective to promote and improve public transport in the city by using bus rapid transit system. Private operators for the specified contract periods are allowed to operate through BRT system, and private operator is not authorized to collect any fees. So, the South African example in this particular case is similar to the example of Canadian road construction, where the private parties were also not allowed to charge any fee. Some more instances of public private partnership can be also seen in Canada, Ontario Highway, in Australia Airport Link, Cross City Tunnel and Sydney Harbour Tunnel. In United States, first generation PPP projects as the asset monetization Indiana Toll Road, the second generation PPP projects as the variable prices on the Port of Miami Tunnel, and the third generation PPP projects value of money, cost benefit analysis, the Dulles Road, Toll Road, State Highways. So, we can see here the varieties of public private partnership models are being adopted in the world today, and experiences of these countries, various experiences in railway, also in case of urban public transports, in case of ports, in case of roads, in case of airports. We have seen that these models are basically the models which provides us the new basic infrastructure, and these facilities are now being provided to the public. It was impossible to have such infrastructure without partnership between the government and private parties. So, through this PPP models, various PPP model, we can sum up that these models are really the new innovations in the governance, and we are finding that these models are really coming up successfully in many countries, and we hope that further innovation in public private partnership model is going to again bridge the gap between the infrastructure demanded and infrastructure supplied. Thank you.